Hi, I'm Erik Krogstad, and my discussion today will be the Rosicrucian Vault. Um, this was a popular, or the main theme of a manuscript that was released in Germany in the 1600s called the Fama Fraternitatis, which basically signaled the beginning of the Rosicrucian movement. Now, when approaching a topic like this, you can go down a slew of different avenues. Um, Ideas, theories, approach, and all of which most people won't even agree upon. Um, Everybody has their own theories into hidden meanings, and those start to dive into Kabbalah. They start to talk about magic. They start to talk about symbolism, whether the place even existed or not. Was this all in theory? Was it a joke? Um, and to everybody who wants to weigh in on the subject, I will just say yes. So, whatever your preconceived notion is, I will just say you're right. And we'll leave it at that. And we'll get into the academics and why I believe that my theories will be presented in a light that is more academic and based on everything I've read, which is a lot. This has really become a labor of love for me. Um, I've dove into countless books, all of which will be referenced at the end of this article on a slide, so that everybody can research on their own. And I hope it does spark something in you to go into this subject and material, because it truly is fascinating. It truly is remarkable, and there is much hidden into it. Um, so I'd like to start a controversial topic, so to say, with a controversial figure. And that would be Aleister Crowley and his comment on the Rosicrucians. And the remark goes, incidentally, it is not very safe to talk about Rosicrucians, because their name has become a signal for letting loose the most devastating floods of nonsense. And that came from Magic Without Tears. So, after a lot of research, I understood what he was talking about, because there is some far out stuff, a lot of inaccuracies, a lot of so-called experts, a lot of, you get the point. So, I want to specifically just focus on the vault as a central piece of this. I also want to talk about some people, some groups, some events, and things that were just transpiring around this time, which led to the discovery. And I would like to dive into some of the thoughts and ideas around objects, the numbers, and then documents that correlate to this idea. So, where are we? Right? The 1600s in Germany. You had a lot going on. You're at the tail end of the Renaissance. The Great Schism had happened between the Eastern Church and the Roman Church. The Reformation had begun. There was a 30-year war happening. With the expulsion of the Jewish people in Spain in 1492, most had migrated over to Germany. So you had some of the top Kabbalists of the time living there. Alchemy was a very big thing. Michael Myers and just everybody seemed to be central in Germany alongside Kabbalists at the time. You had philosophy. You had modern medicine and science starting to happen at that time. There was a magical new land called America that was just discovered, and which would be governed by Sir Francis Bacon. And it had all the signs and all of the history, all of the people just infused together, and just about to pop with knowledge, pop with excitement, pop with ideas, bring forth philosophy, and just a magical time. In 1611, a messenger arrived at the castle of Plotzkau in northeast Germany with an extraordinary document. It was called the Fama Fraternitatis. It was a discovery of a fraternity, and they called themselves the Noble Order of the Rosy Cross. Now, the person in the castle who received it was Prince Augustus von Anhalt. He was a Hermetic aficionado, possessor of an alchemical laboratory, and also had a printing press. He was deeply impressed by this. In fact, he was astounded. So in 1614, the Fama Fraternitatis was put to print, and it ignited crazy amount of interest all over Europe. People wanted to know what this was, who this fraternity was. The document described fantastic tale of the secret brotherhood of adepts. Their founder, a man by the name of Christian Rosicrucian, who became known as an acronym later, CRC. And the Fama announced the existence of the secret fraternity and described the life teachings of CRC. It also went on to describe a vault, one in which CRC and much of the Rosicrucian secrets and knowledge were buried. The document finally invites all like-minded individuals to contact the Brotherhood and share in its alchemical wisdom and spiritual wealth. But why a fraternity? Let's walk through some groups, some events, and some things that led into this history. When you bring up the topic of Rosicrucians, you definitely get a wide variety of opinions. Some ideas are good, some ideas not so good. Now, the goal isn't to go through every group throughout history who's ever existed. The goal here is to really lead us up into why knowledge became secretive, why it was only transmitted through worthy people, and the way that knowledge was hidden, encoded, and then transferred for hundreds of years, and the reasons why. So let's get started. So let's start with Gnosticism. It's a great place to begin. It's right around the beginning of Common Era, or AD, and it encompassed a lot of the religions of the time. It took in Hebrew, Persian religions, Egyptian, Oriental, Neoplatonic philosophies, Christian philosophy, and pre-Council of Nicene Christian, which had a much different veneer, obviously, than modern day. Now, definition from Webster's Dictionary says it comes from the Greek word gnosis, which literally means knowledge, and also knowledge of spiritual truth. The Gnostics' search for their own truth was by questioning and gathering knowledge. They believe everybody should find their own truths, and everybody's may be different. So there may be a truth that is true to you, but is not true to me, and it was up to you to find that truth, not to learn it through me. Definitely a different idea of being told what you should believe, what you shouldn't. Not all eggs fit in the same basket. But there was a strong idea of light, and a concealed light, or an inner light in people. That goes back to a Hebrew word called Ar HaGanus, that can be awakened or realized. And this realization, the soul would be liberated from this world. But they believed in a divine spark in man deriving from a divine realm, who fell into this world of fate, birth, death, and needed to be reawakened. So you start to see an idea of an inner light. We're all divine beings. A divine spark is a buzzword because a lot of times they talk about the Big Bang, but for the Big Bang to happen, somebody made it happen, and there was a spark or vibration that resonated afterwards. And each one of us has that in us. So understanding the idea of divine spark, whether you want to do the scientific way, whether you want to believe that God just created us as is, or we all descended from Adam, who was created by God. No matter how I've approached it or looked at it, everybody does have that divine spark in them somewhere. And the goal of Gnosis is to figure out what yours is and what the purpose is of it. So that brings us into something called Manichaeism. Manichaeism comes from a Persian prophet named Mani, who was assumed to be born around 216 or 217 Common Era along the Tigris River. It could be Babylon or Iraq, around that area. But he believed in the teachings of Gautama Buddha, Zoroaster, and Jesus. But he did believe those teachings were incomplete, which most people didn't like. But he had revelations that were from the entire world, and he called his teaching the religion of light. Now, Manichaean writings indicate that Mani received these revelations or confirmations at the age of 12, and then a second time at the age of 24. And over this time, he began preaching at an early age. He was influenced by contemporary Babylonians, Aramaic movements, Syrian dualistic Gnostic people. One in particular would be Bardazan. And a key belief in Manichaeism is that there is an omnipower good and an omnipower evil, bad, or the idea of dualism, light and dark, good, bad. There's really no indifference or gray areas. I guess we live in that gray area, but we'd always need to be going towards light. There was a document discovered called the Mani Codex. And it also became clear he was raised in a Jewish Christian baptism sect growing up. There wasn't many of those writings, though, that were saved over time. And according to the biographies reserved by Ibn al-Nadim, who was the Persian polymath, al-Biruni, also one of the guys with the Picatrix, received revelation from youth, and Mani would call this his twin, or in Greek it was a zygos, from which derived the name Thomas the Apostle, or the twin is double, a divine angel, a protective agent, a higher self, however you really want to think about that. But it taught him truths which developed into a religion. His divine twin, or true self, brought him to the realization, or the terms son of the widow and child of the widow appear to be of Manichaean origin. The Manichaeans themselves were called children of the widow. That was from Mysterio Connections from Carl Jung that he dove into that idea and spoke a lot about it. It's an excellent book. So, what happens to all these great leaders that have visions? Well, you guessed it, he died in prison while waiting execution. He was probably tortured badly, and this was by the Persian Emperor Bahram in 277. So, obviously his corpse was mutilated, and back then, even in England throughout the Dark Ages, people would be hung, dug up, dragged to the streets, buried, dug up again, lit on fire, to the entertainment of people. So no different there. And the slaughters became commonplace for his followers as well. In 291, Persia outlawed the teaching of light, followed by the Roman Empire 5 years later in 296. But this religion and the idea of light spread too quick for them to keep up. So this spread across the entire Middle East, into Egypt, North Africa, Asia Minor, Armenia, Rome, Gaul, Italy, and then over to Spain, into China, and finally into Tibet. And you'll notice the symbol that I've used here that you're looking at seems to be Chinese. Well, it is, because it's still practiced there today in small groups. This religion lasted for well over 1,000 years and touched every corner of the world. Manichaeism practiced the sacraments of baptism and communion, although they did not accept the divinity of Jesus. The Progress had an inner circle, several degrees, some initiatory rites, signs, and passwords, the same as since the Greeks have been doing in the Neoplatonic movement for hundreds of years prior to this. And about 1000 AD, it hit the Byzantine Empire, in particular Bulgaria, and spread throughout Western Europe. And in the 11th century, it penetrated into southern France and became Cathari. And we are going to get into that next. Catharism, which comes from the word Cathuri, or the pure ones. It was a Christian dualist and Gnostic revival. The Cathars, as they're known by, subscribed to the doctrine of reincarnation. They believed in heaven with no hell, a recognition of the feminine principle in religion, that Jesus was not the actual Son of God, but a messenger. The clergy were of both sexes, and they insisted on a direct and personal knowledge or religious mystical experience firsthand. They wanted direct communication with God or the Godhead. They wanted to feel His presence. They wanted, didn't want to be told what God was. They wanted to know themselves. So they were heir to this knowledge, which mostly came from the East. And the reason was the transmission of this message was love. That was how they spread their message. Love was the ultimate, and it was the way that they expressed genuine religious belief. Everything was love, and love was given by God, so that's the way you would travel back through to reach God. So they were dualists. They believed in light and dark, as we've mentioned. They believed in the idea of basically Jehovah versus Satan. There's only good and bad. And the dualists have been around forever. I mean, if you remember the Magi from the Bible, or the three wise men, they were Persian dualists. They found Jesus through astrology, and they set off with gifts of incense, frankincense, and myrrh. And the good God was of all immaterial things, from the Magi to all the way to the Cathars. They believed that anything you could touch was corruptible by the devil. Everything that was untouchable, your feelings, emotions, ideas, thoughts, all needed to be pure. They needed to reflect that divine spark that was given by God. And material was really a thing that was contrived by the devil to trap your souls and imprison them in human bodies. And as the Cathars put it, we are all divine sparks, even angels imprisoned in tunics of flesh. Which sounds pretty cool. But now it was a different approach to religion in the Dark Ages when this really came about. And it wouldn't last long, because in the year 1051 to 52, many were hanged and burned. And it was decided by the church that the Cathars were a leprosy. And they just started the slaughter from there. And the important part is of where, because it launched in the Albigensian Crusade of 1209. That was when it was just all-out war. And it's important to remember that for later when we talk about the Fama. But during that, and Albigezian was really just a town called Albi in southern France. So the crusade began there, and they just started killing everybody. And at least 15,000 men and women were slaughtered wholesale just in that town alone. And one of the scariest parts of it was an officer inquired to the Pope's representative, because obviously not everybody was a Cathar. And he said, how can you distinguish these heretics from the true believers? And the answer he got was, kill them all. God will recognize his own. Which almost sounds like that 80s t-shirt motto, kill them all, let God sort them out. Well, that was the official church response. So in about 1330, they had wiped out most of the last of the Cathars. They ceased to exist in France due to hundreds of years of persecution. So what they did was they started to hide that knowledge into fraternities, chivalrous, I guess you would say fraternities as well, but just orders, military units, anywhere with power that could disguise what the teaching was. And they wanted to keep that transmission going of love, or rose and light. And we're going to start going into some more individuals now that upheld that idea, kept working with divine communication, and really set the stage for what would become in the Fama. And now we have an individual, Johannes Trithemius, from 1462 to 1516, who was a Christian monk with the Benedictine order. And how that happened was pretty much an accident. He was going home and there was a blizzard in Germany, and he popped into one of the monasteries in the town of Sponheim, and he decided to stay, which I think was normal back then. By today's standards, obviously wouldn't be allowed. And when he stayed, he became a novice, and then by the age of 21, he was elevated to an abbot, which is unheard of at any time. And he set out to transform that abbey. He thought that people were unlearned, and there was a library currently there that had about 50 books. And you could probably assume that they were just different versions of the Bible, maybe different languages or revisions. So by the time he left, there was over 2,000 books in that library, and most of the men were learned. He was a featured speaker and a secretary for the Bursfield Congregation's annual chapter, and he did that for 10 years. And he was also learned in Greek, Hebrew. He studied Pythagoras, Hermetics, and Kabbalah. Now later, he had a visionary experience. This is one of the first people that I know of that really had this experience or divine communication, which didn't begin his own religion. He did start to write books, which we'll talk about, but never made it into a religion. And the angels would instruct him in the art of stenography, which was the art of writing secret messages and transmitting them over long distances through the medium of angelic messengers. His most famous work was called Stenographia. It was written in 1499, published in Frankfurt in 1606. The book had 3 volumes, which most people thought were about magic. And in fact, he got in trouble with the church for a while because he shared some of his knowledge with another abbot who went and told on him. And they started saying he was practicing black magic. But the book was actually concerned with cryptography and stenography, mostly the first 2 volumes. But the 3rd volume is still considered by most to be solely about magic. That got a lot of people's attention. John Dee still gives him credit as a mystical foundation. It also caught the eye of some other people, mainly Cornelius Agrippa. And Agrippa came to visit him in 1513, and it was reported that he was so overwhelmed by his meeting and knowledge that was transferred that he became one of his pupils. Another one of his later pupils was also Paracelsus, who was the father of modern-day medicine. But the correspondence with Agrippa was more noted because Agrippa wrote 3 books of occult philosophy, which became, or most considered, the foundational work of all Western magic since its publication. So it laid the groundwork, and it was a student-teacher relationship with this. But John Dee was not a student, but he was Queen Elizabeth's astrologer, and the art of scrying was created by him, or angelic messages. And he began his book, Kabbalistically inspired Monus Hieroglyphica, in 1564, after he got a chance discovery of a manuscript of stenography. Because remember, it wasn't published until 1606. So somewhere along the line, John Dee, who had the greatest library in all of Europe, came across that and started to do his work from it. So a highly influential person throughout Europe, throughout the occult world, I guess you would say, and a fascinating person. So now that we've gotten to the 1600s, I want to talk about some groups, because the people we've already talked about, the religions that lead through the idea of light, the idea of dualism, why people were killed, why things needed to go underground. So there were some additional movements that started to take place, even in starting the 1400s, or as Yarker would call them, arcane schools that dealt with these type of topics that were outlawed by churches and societies at the time. But in 1429, you can actually see on the image here, Philip the Good, he was a Duke of Burgundy, formulated the Order of the Golden Fleece, which a dear friend and brother of mine, Yasser Al-Khatib, does a great presentation on. If you're interested in finding out more, contacting him, I will have my email up at the end on a slide that you can take my information and contact him. But it's a great job. 1512, you had the Brotherhood of the Trowel, something that would be used to spread cement. They were in Florence, Italy. 1571, the Militia Crucifera Evangelica. 1577, you had the Order of the Inseparables. 1578, Order of the Holy Spirit. 1580, society called the Family of Love. 1617, the Fruit Bearing Society. 1646, the first documented Freemason meeting with Elias Aspmole in Scotland. And many, many, many more. Just scratching the surface with some interesting groups that you may or may not want to just check out individually outside of this presentation. But from here, we sort of set the stage, as I said, and we're going to start getting into the Fama right now. On to the Fama and Christian Rosicrucians. He was the legendary founder of Rosicrucianism. He was born in 1378 to a poor but noble family. He undertakes a journey around the Mediterranean, and several times he meets with sages. And the places throughout Arabia are interesting. You have Cyprus, Damascus, Damcar, Egypt, and Fez, Morocco for 2 years before heading back to Spain and then ultimately Germany. But the places he picked were interesting. Damascus, obviously, that's where, if you know the Bible, Paul had his higher revelation or met his guardian angel, so to say, and discovered his true purpose. You have Damcar, full of Sufis. You have Egypt, don't need to go into that. You have Fez in Morocco, which was practicing a lot of different Sufi beliefs and pre-Sufi beliefs with astrology. And what it does is he wants to open the door to the soul worlds. Because within himself, he understands the microcosm, that tiny piece of the world as a whole that you are. And within himself, he started to see he was a reflection of the macrocosm, the entire world. Even though he was a little part, he represented that of the bigger part. And this is what a lot of his teachings and learnings had brought him to this state of enlightenment. So he was going to take this knowledge and return to Germany and tell his disciples how to build the house of Sancti Spiritus. Now, the house of Sancti Spiritus obviously is not a real house. It is that house within, not made with hands inside of you. And part of the Rosicrucian requirement, the third one, in fact, is to meet together at the house Sancti Spiritus every year at Christmas. Now, the way he put it was, and I'm going to quote this, even if 100,000 people had seen it up close, our building will remain eternally untouched, unbroken, unseen, and completely hidden from the godless world, end quote. Or profane, I guess you would call it. But that was an interesting idea because it's the soul world. And to gain consciousness access to this realm is what can be called initiation. You have to be initiated into something to be able to contact these higher levels. And he wanted to wake up the entire world to this, but it was through the use of fraternity, and the reasons stated obviously earlier about, getting killed over things like that would be the reason to keep it within a select group. But everybody in the world wanted in on this. And the way that the book goes is he had disciples, and he had a brother A who was replaced by a brother N who was an NN. And the way that worked was, 1573, he's gone. You come up to the 1600s, everybody's lost their way again. They don't know how to reach the house. For whatever reasons, they've lost their way or lost the true teachings. So they want to try and find their way back. And that is a lot of the symbolism you're going to see in this story, especially Brother NN, who was the original archetype or architect that found the vault again. I'll call him an architect, even though he was an accidental one. I don't believe it was an accident. But the common spiritual building, and he found a plaque with names of all the brothers who were a part of this original brotherhood. They decided to move this to a more suitable place, and a nail protrudes from this plaque. They pull it out, and then all of a sudden this hidden door becomes visible. And the symbolism of that is immense, and I'm going to get into that now. So, symbolism. Now, as I said, Brother NN had replaced another brother. And in the Fama, it says, after that A, in Gala Norbinosis was deceased, then succeeded in his place by our loving brother NN. Now, if you remember earlier, when we started speaking about the Cathars, I told you to remember that place. Because Gallonabrosis was a Roman province located and was now Languedoc, the province in southern France. So you have a death in the place of where the Cathars were, and now you have the person that took their place coming into Germany. And if you're into symbolism, you can see what they're bringing forward. Now, this was a common theme. There's many people in that area, and a lot of people have talked about alchemy and roses. They say Dante, who wrote the Divine Comedy, was a Rosicrucian. In Jean de Meung, he had Roman de la Rose and Bacchiao's Filicapo. But the Roman de la Rose had a lot of alchemical wisdom. Its author wrote an important alchemical treatise called A Demonstration in Nature, and you're looking at right now a loving couple with a guardian angel above them. And in the Roman de la Rose, there's a description of a castle surrounded by a sevenfold wall covered with symbolic figures. Sevenfold is always going to be a theme, so that'll be explained a little bit later, but just keep 7 in your mind as well. But he was desirous of a mission into the castle, and it had to be able to explain the meaning of these figures. That would be someone who was initiated or had passwords. The hero of the romance is named Amat, and in Latin that means the lover. And in the Fama, brothers, Christian Rosicrucian is called our loving Father as well. Now Amat in the story comes to a beautiful garden, and at the center of the garden he finds a rose. That rose is transformed into a maiden. Through the magic power of Venus, in that self-same hour, a wondrous miracle befell. The rose became a damsel, of form and beauty past compare, clothed in her own rich golden hair. Now, the Gnostic Christians of Languedoc and Provence knew the great secret and hid one of those important keys in the symbolism of the rose. Thus, among books written by Albigensian authors, we find one entitled The Roof of the Fragrant Rose, another named The Leaves of the Rose, and the rose is a flower of Venus. And we've just seen in the Roman de la Rosa the magic power of Venus and its effects by transforming it into that woman. So Venus has a power of transformation. As we progress with the study of this allegory in the Rosicrucians, you'll see that magic power of Venus, and you'll see the roses over and over. And the dying part of France, where Gnostic Christianity hid its wisdom, was under the rose. So it's a very important idea to follow, and you're going to see why in a little bit. Back to NN. So NN he's found the temple, but doesn't know what it is. He's making repairs to it, and he comes across a memorial table which is cast of brass, and in the brass contains the names of the brethren with some other few things. Now in this table stuck a great nail, somewhat strong, so that when he was with force drawn out, he took with him an indifferently big stone out of the thin wall or plastering of the hidden door, and so uncovered the door. Wherefore we did by and longing throw down the rest of the wall, and cleared the door, upon which the great letters were written, Post CXX Annos Pedibo, with the year of the Lord under it. So that roughly translates to, after 120 years I shall rise again. Now, when we're looking at that, there's a lot going on. You have a guy in a mystical place moving things, nails and stones, Latin mottos, and hidden doors. So let's look at that. So 120 years is a perfected consciousness or illuminated man. According to the Bible, Moses was 120 years old when he dies. There's also another verse of man where his days shall be 120 years. And it really goes into the magical age of the vault. The Fama uses the noun brass, as does the English translation of the Old Testament. where it usually indicates a mixture of copper and zinc. But in original Hebrew, the metal copper, which the alchemists call Venus, is what's meant here. Now, sticking along those lines of Hebrew, along the lines of alchemy and astrology, in Hebrew, it's gematria. So every letter corresponds to a number, corresponds to a meaning of a word, and corresponds to a planet. It's one of the keys to understanding the Kabbalah and a lot of the sciences and alchemy. Now, when we take that approach, we can look at a nail. And in Hebrew, a nail is called vav, which you may have heard from the Tetragrammaton, Yod, He, Vav, He. But it also corresponds to a zodiac sign, which is Taurus. Taurus, as most know, is ruled by Venus. And again, creation and Venus. But according to astrologers, within Taurus, the moon is exalted. Now, in the occult, the moon is a symbol for memory. And Venus has everything to do with imagination. Even so, in the allegory, the nail brings with it the stone, which reveals a hidden door to the compendium of the whole universe. So, attached to the nail is a stone. And the same way I've mentioned before, the stone is rejected by the builders, is a very popular phrase in the Bible. It's also known as the Philosopher's Stone. It is also known in Hebrew as ABN, and the word Eben, EHBEN, which signifies the union of the Son and the Father. Now, if you look right at this diagram, you'll see the Hebrew set up almost like a math problem. You have Father and Son, and when you add them together, as you can do in that language, since they're a language of numbers and letters, Father plus Son equals stone, and the Hebrew corresponds to that. And this is the cornerstone of creation, and it is also known as the foundation of Christian faith. Now, in 1609, Henry Coonrath published a book called Amphitheum Chemicum, which appears an illustration showing the word ABN, or Eben, enclosed in a triangle. This radiant triangle with the letters ABN at its corners is borne by a dragon, and then a dragon on a mountain. The mountain in the middle or center of an enclosure is surrounded by a wall having 7 sides, whose corners bear the words left to right and clockwise on the wall: dissolution, purification, Azoth Pondus, solution, multiplication, fermentation, projection. Thus, the inner wall summarizes the alchemical operations. Its gate has the motto non omnibus, which means not for all. And I can't think of a better way to put that as an entrance into a central mystery, because we'll go into later inferior governors, but you can always go back to a simple Bible quote, which was, "Do not throw pearls before swine," because this isn't for everybody, and the general population really wasn't that interested. But the people that are still interested today are probably the same types of people that were interested back then. And we'll go on to some more of this. Surrounding this inner wall is another, in the form of a 7-pointed star. As you'll see, it's composed of 14 equal lines. And the gate on the outer wall is flanked by 2 obelisks. Over one of them is the sun, and this obelisk's name is faith. Over the other is the moon, and this pillar is named taciturnity, or silence. Definitely an interesting idea if you know about the middle pillar and the gate being you, since you would become the middle pillar. The gateway is within yourself, is what it's saying. So, and there's a figure bearing the caduceus of Hermes or Mercury, the stick with the two snakes, as you see in any doctor's office. And standing on a table, which is written "Good Works," and below in the motto, "The ignorant deride, what the wise extol and admire," which we could really just do a whole presentation on, so just think about that. And in this diagram, we have the same associations with seven-sided figures and a stone, all of which appear in the Fama. And the mystic mountain at the dragon at the summit is also a Rosicrucian symbol, and one can see that in Thomas Vaughan's Lumen de Lumine, which is another fascinating book, and with multiple translations available. Now, the stone is fastened to the nail, and the nail to the memorial table. Thus, the stone is removed because it sticks to the nail, and this will show you that intuition follows right recollection. Your intuition, or Vav, with the nail, brought you to that. And the more you pull and followed your intuition, right recollection of the stone came with it. It fell out of you. It's a part of you. And one goes with the other. And then you've come to the door. Now, the door will continue with the symbolism we've been talking about. In Gematria or Hebrew, door is represented by the number 4, Deleth. However, in Hebrew, it also corresponds to the planet Venus. So, when you also talk about Hebrew, you have the paths of wisdom, or the Kabbalistic tree of life, which you're seeing right in front of you. Now, there's 32 paths of wisdom there, and what that means is there's 10 sephiras and 22 possible paths within those sephiras. So the Deleth gets assigned number 14, which is luminous intelligence. So this path is said to be the institutor of arcane knowledge, that is, or the establisher of things. Deleth represents not the doorway, but the valve of the door, the bar to entrance, or the gate that we just spoke about in the last alchemical representation. But it's also on the foundation of holiness, or more accurately, holy foundations. The meaning as part of the allegory should now be clear. The combined powers of memory and intuition, the table and the nail, bring with them the stone of consciousness union with the higher self. And the door of liberation is revealed. This door leads to understanding of the mathematical and physiological principles at work in the construction of the universe. Thus, the Fama says, through this door, the brethren gained access to such a treasure of knowledge as would serve for the complete restoration of all arts and sciences. And back to the Fama. So, they said, in the morning following, we opened the door, and there appeared to our sight a single vault of 7 sides and 7 corners, every side 5 foot broad, the height of 8 feet. Although the sun never shined in this vault, nevertheless, it was enlightened with another sun, which had learned from the sun and was situated in the upper part in the center of the ceiling. Now when we come to the symbolism of the vault, described as being of 7 sides and 7 corners, every side 5 feet by 8. In other words, the ground was, or the plan of the vault was a heptagon. There's another piece of Venusian symbolism with the 7 sides. Agrippa had also talked about 7 by 7 being a magic square to Venus, as well as attributing Venus to Netzach, the 7th circle, and the tree of life. So let's pop over to this slide here. And we can see the 7 sides were represented by 7 concentric circles. The diagram would serve for that of the solar system. And A, the altar, would be the sun. north, east, south, west, the quarters, B, the heptagon, the 7 planets, and C, the decagon, or zodiac. The tomb would, in this case, be a veritable compendium of the universe. Now, Hargrave Jennings gives a diagram figure, which is with interest in this connection. You can see the small circle at the top right there represents the ceiling of the tomb, and the large circles below it represent the floor of the tomb. And you see that little connecting string that brings them in together. The 7 sides of the tomb represent the 7 planets. 12 outside the door are shown by the 12 signs of the zodiac. The connection between the terrestrial and celestial suns is shown by the lines from the ceiling of the center to the floor of the tomb. Since the top and the bottom of the vault are equal heptagons, the area of the floor is that of the ceiling, or as above, so below. That is to say, faithfulness above and faithfulness below. This would have been familiar indeed to students of alchemy who have heard that by heart in the dictum of Hermes. So, back to the idea of gematria and the hidden symbolism of the numbers represented. Obviously, there was a reference to Venus with 7. But they said every side of the vault had an area of 40 square feet. So 5 feet by 8. We'll give you 40 times 7 is 280 square feet. Now add that to 182, which is the sum area of the ceiling and floor. Gives you a number of 462. I think that's important because why else would they give the size and shapes of a room if they didn't want you to actually figure out that number? So 462, once you plug it into gematria, gives you something called bar or bir laharoi. And it's mentioned in Genesis 16:14. It means the well of the living and seeing one. And as you can see here from the description that I have on the page, it breaks down every letter in Bir Laharoi, and you get down to B. The literal meaning is the well of the living and seeing one. So what does that mean, right? What that means is you can go to the Zohar, and the well is none other than the Shekinah, the living one. It is an allusion to the righteous one who lives in 2 worlds, one who lives above in the higher world and one who also lives below in the lower world, which exists and is illuminated through him. Think of the suns being illuminated. Just as the moon is only illuminated when she looks at the sun. Thus, the well of existence literally emanates from the living one, whom it sees. And when it looks to him, it is filled with the living waters. End of literal translation. So the identity of numeration between the well, which the Zohar explains, represents the sum total of existence emanating from the righteous one. That is the sun that is illuminating the sun with no source of light. It's a supreme unity. Again, the idea of coming together and the commandments of Jehovah. It's an underlying meaning for the fundamentals of Kabbalah. The universe is commanded into manifestation through the Word of God. And that can go back to Genesis when God spoke and created the heavens and the earth. Now the Fama said that although the sun never shone in this vault, it was enlightened with another sun, which had learned this from the sun, meaning the physical. This reference, of course, is to the microcosm in man. The internal sun located in the ceiling on the upper part of the head does truly learn how to shine from the external sun outside. For our inner enlightenment, it's a conversion of energy drawn directly from the day star. That's the physical center of our solar system. So when they're talking about reaching illumination or enlightenment, it's not purely spiritual or mental process. And it's also not non-physical. It just is. So you're not going to have one without the other. You can't just have a spiritual gnosis, or as the Eastern people call it, satori, without the physical work. The yogis all did yoga as a means to exercise into it. There's a physical aspect and a mental aspect to this. So you'd really want to say metaphysical is that range of spiritual activity that lies beyond ordinary sensation. You can be happy sitting in the daylight, but it's something more than that. It's what I was talking about earlier about feel, or that direct communication. And things that move, let's just use the word, beyond normal senses. This all clear and bright, also the seventh side, and the two heptagons. So we kneeled down all together and gave thanks to the sole wise, sole mighty, and sole eternal God, who has taught us more than all men's wits could have found out. Praise be his holy name. This vault we parted in three parts: the upper, the wall, and the ground floor. On the upper part, you shall understand no more at this time, but it was divided according to the seven sides in the triangle, which was in the bright center, but what therein is contained in you. You have that light, is what they're saying. And we've already talked about the I am in the middle. We've talked about the top of the ceiling. Now we're going to go into the bottom. And the floor of the vault is similarly divided into triangles, but the triangle in the center points west instead of east. And most people will know west is where the sun goes down in Europe. So it's the end of enlightenment. It's the end of the day. And is black instead of white. The inferior governors mentioned in the Fama are the destructive forces that Kabbalists call klipoth, or shells. And that also led to a lot of debates that I found, especially Tilton and McIntosh disagree on it. And it comes down to translation, whether it was inferior governor or it was plural. I don't know German, so I have no way to weigh in on that. But whether it means devil, whether it means devils or demons, the allegory still doesn't change. It is that lower self. In this part of the vault, I leave to manifest the same for fear of the abuse of evil in the ungodly world. Even the forces that we think ordinary of as evil have their appropriate place in the great plan. Which, that sentence right there really struck a chord with me, because usually you don't hear evil being part of a great plan, but what it is the floor or the threshold that you're entering upon. You're in darkness, and like I said with duality throughout this presentation, there is good, there is evil, you are going to encounter evil. And that plays an important role with this part of the discussion. And for the final passage that I'm going to read from the Fama, we'll talk about before they leave the altar. And it goes, "Now, as we've not yet seen the dead body of our careful and wise father, we therefore remove the altar aside Then we lifted up a strong plate of brass, again, and found a fair and worthy body, whole and unconsumed. As the same is here lively counterfeited, with all the ornaments and attires. In his hand he held a parchment called T, which next to the Bible is our greatest treasure, which ought not to be delivered to the center of the world. Now, Book T, there's no other meaning given here, but there's two people that believe Book T equals the Tarot. One would be William Wynne Westcott from the Golden Dawn, and the other would be Papoose, who later joined the Golden Dawn, but was doing a French Martinist system. So with Papoose, and what he said was interesting, and it made the most sense to me compared to everything else I read. And it is one of the most important documents of the Golden Dawn is Book T, an outline of occult tarot correspondences linking the tarot to the Tree of Life, astrology, and Kabbalistic mysticism, which really makes it interesting that if everything Christian Rosicrucian learned, he hid within the tarot through his travels and symbolism. And it does make sense. Also, MacGregor Mathers couldn't get a copy of this book, but he wrote something called The Secret Workings of the Golden Dawn, Book T, the Tarot. And it says comprising manuscripts NOPQR in an unlettered TAM instruction. I want to get my hands on that, so my email will be up at the end if anybody wants to send me a copy. That would be great. But that is where we're going to end with the story of the Fama. So, in summation with all of this, you have the reference to the building of a house, or a house not made with hands, or that temple, where the soul of man is linked to the Spirit of God, and also where the Spirit of God dwells, just as the I Am, the person, or the Shekinah, that references God but sees God, the sun does not shine unto him. When a neophyte or beginner enters the house or temple, the house must be changed to a degree to suit that person, just as Brother NN was changing the house and then found the tomb through intuition and knowledge and curiosity. So, to a certain extent, the work is dark when he enters, especially the terror of the threshold, which was the inferior governors that was spoken about earlier, the most awful beings. But when you master your demons, or you master that initiation, or that initial fright, you suddenly see light upon a memorial table, and then you will see the light. And it takes a good architect to get that far, or a good person. When you begin the work, you have to master the terror. And then you find that thin wall between yourself and that which you seek, that plaster that easily crumbled away. And after this is done, we give thanks to God for the rest of the night. And the fact is, the unworthy, according to the Fama, cannot understand this. They don't get what it means to go the dark night of the soul. They don't know what it means to transgress. The ignorant only know to suffer. They don't know how to build upon these things. That's what this was teaching. This was teaching that to pass through, you get to the light, and your intuition will drive you there. And the unworthy cannot enter, and they don't understand it. And even though it's more fully explained, the worthy will know, and the door will be open to them.